Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to start this morning with a meeting of the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee with all other regents invited to attend. The chair of that committee is Regent Brent Smith. Members of the committee are Regent Connolly Kiesler, Regent Rosenzweig, Regent Shields, and the president and vice president sit as ex officio members of that committee. I turn it over to Chairman Smith. Oh, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that first. First, we're going to start. I got my agenda mixed up in my head without looking. We will not start with the committee, the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee. We would start with a presentation on stem cell research, inviting Dr. Yunying Yu and Carl Gulbranson, Managing Director of Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. Dr. Yu?
Pat Farrell was going to introduce it.
Pat was going to introduce it.
So I thought I would just introduce Yunying. First of all, I want to apologize that Jamie Thompson can't be here. Jamie is out in California right now, which is both good and bad. We want to make sure he comes back to Wisconsin. But he has collaborations going with the University of California, San Diego, and the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he was booked to give talks at both places, and apologizes for not being here. But we hope that sometime in the near future we can have a celebration and have all of you at that celebration with Jamie and Yunying there. Yunying is the lead author of this paper, so we're very happy to have the lead author. She's the one that really did the work, right? And she is she's a very talented young PhD who did her undergraduate work at Peking University in Beijing, graduated top in her class in plant biology, and then went to University of Pennsylvania, get her PhD in molecular and cell biology. Did that in 2002 and came directly to Wisconsin to work with Dr. Thompson. And we were very fortunate that she did that because they made all of our Thanksgivings very nice Thanksgivings. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Yunying.
Jamie probably would have done a better job explaining this work to you. I will try my best. But just in case I slip some professional terms in there, feel free to interrupt me. So I'll start with a very basic introduction about the cell. Most of you most likely already know what cell is. It's essentially some structure surrounded by membrane. It's the building bricks of our body. And inside this outside membrane, there's another membrane surrounded structure called a nucleus. And it contains the genomic DNA that determines what we look like, why we are human instead of mouse. For each individual, there's small variations in the DNA sequence that determines the individuality of our or of humans. For each individual, we came from one cell. This is called one cell embryo. When this embryo develops, it will form a structure called blastocyst. It's essentially early embryos. And all the tissues like your brain, heart, pancreas came from a group of cells inside this structure called the inner cell mass. And for the adults, we have more than over 200 types of different type cells. These cells are very stable. That means under normal situations, they do not change to different types of cells. They do not go back time. And this has its advantages and disadvantages. The advantage, of course, they basically make who we are. We are not changing constantly. We are basically made as humans. The disadvantage, of course, because the human body has very limited ability to repair ourselves. So when these cells die, they will lead to all kinds of disease. Several well-known diseases like neurological disease, Parkinson's disease, and ALS. These are due to the cell death of certain neurons. And like heart disease, it's cell death of the cardiomyocytes. And the diabetes, this because of the cell death of the pancreas cells. There's success in some transplantation, but the material is very limited. And for some tissues, basically, there's no stem cell, adult stem cell available. So there's no way to repair these tissues. Embryonic stem cells seem to have answers to these questions. So embryonic stem cells was derived from the early embryos. The small group of cells were taking out the early embryo, and when you grow these cells in the in vitro culture, they can form embryonic stem cells. These cells can grow indefinitely. That means we can obtain large quantities of materials from these cells. And these cells can be coaxed to differentiate into all types of the body, like blood cells, muscle cells, neurons. So these two key features make these cells very interesting. However, there's a lot of controversy over these cells because of their origin. And for practical use, they also have a lot of problems. We have to develop a method to differentiate these cells into clinically relevant cells like neurons and cardiomyocytes, etc. One major hurdle is the immune rejection, and we can potentially establish a large number of embryonic stem cell lines, but the number will be very big if we want to cover essentially all the humans all the individuals in the population. And people have been trying to solve this problem. One method several groups have attempted is through the nuclear cloning techniques. I think all of you are familiar with the birth of Dolly. So in this case, basically, the DNA were taken from the adult sheep, and when this DNA was transplanted into the egg, they can develop into a new sheep. Its DNA is essentially identical to its donor. So using this approach, we can derive embryo stem cells from the cloned embryos. And the publication, there's one publication last month in Nature, basically is trying to attempt to address these problems through this method. They successfully established embryonic stem cells through nuclear cloning in monkeys. However, when we think about this approach, there's several problems. Like you need a human oocytes. The procedure is rather painful. I don't think many people many women will volunteer for that. And the second is the efficiency is low. For the monkeys, they only derived 2 cell lines out of over 300 oocytes. That means more than 10 women need to donate their oocytes in order to establish 1 cell line. And the technique is very difficult and it's very challenging. So consider the whole cost, even if it is successful, it's not, it cannot afford by most of the people. So I've been trying to develop an alternative approach to solve the immune rejection problem. For the first 2 years, I tried to prove that human embryonic stem cells also has the reprogramming ability similar to eggs. So I used the blood cells as a system. And in this work, confirmed that human embryo stem cells are able to reprogram human blood cells. And this uses a technique called the cell-cell fusion technique. So basically, when you fuse the embryo stem cells with the blood cells, we are introducing all contents in the embryo stem cells into the blood cells. And then the blood cells will become embryo stem cell-like cells. It proves the principle. However, for practical clinical use, it's very limited since the result set has 2 sets of genes. So the question is, what are the factors in human embryo stem cells involved in reprogramming? So when you think about the cells, like embryo stem cells, and we have the differential cells, like skin cells, they essentially contain the same set of the genes. What makes them, one is embryo stem cells and another is skin cells. It's because of the specific combination of genes that are expressed in each cell type are different. So there must be something unique to the human embryo stem cells that are involved in reprogramming. So based on this idea, we basically started screening. First, we identified genes whose expression are enriched in human embryo stem cells. We basically did a global gene expression analysis of the human embryo stem cells and the blood cells. And by subtraction, and we obtained around 150 genes. And we cloned most of these genes and started to test these genes in the differential cells. So this system, the differential cells, either can be obtained from human embryo stem cells and can be obtained from skin cells. The strategy is very simple. We basically introduce these different combinations of these genes into these cells and then culture these cells under the conditions used for the human embryo stem cell culture. And after several weeks, we basically look over our culture and see whether we can find that any colonies has a similar morphology as human embryo stem cells. And eventually we identified and optimized one set of 4 genes that can achieve reprogramming in human skin cells. So this was published last month. So to conclude, basically there's 2 approaches. And the early approach, basically, the human embryo stem cell was derived from the early embryos that involved the embryo destruction. And now we basically, by simply manipulating the cells in vitro, we can obtain embryo stem cell-like cells. It doesn't involve any embryos. It certainly has much higher advantages. So why are human iPS cells important? Similar to human embryo stem cells, these cells can also differentiate into all cell types of the body. So we basically can obtain iPS cells from people with the disease or prone to disease, and can study how the disease occurs during development in vitro. Yet allow us to understand the disease, to understand more about the disease, so eventually come up with a more efficient method to cure the disease. And the second usage of these cells is for the drug screening. A lot of drugs has different side effects in different people because there are different genetic backgrounds. So we basically can use this technique to obtain iPS cells from people with different genetic background, and we can use this to screen the drug and see what kind of side effects they have, and would potentially significantly increase the safety of the drug. And last, of course, most people are interested in the transplantation therapies. It solves the problem of immune rejection. However, there's several other problems still exist. So it will be still will be some time before the actual application of this technology. Scientifically, I think this finding is very important. I think a lot of people tend to ignore that. So when you view development as a linear from early one-cell embryo to embryo stem cells and to all types of differentiated cells, now we can basically turn fully differentiated cells like skin cells all the way back to the embryo stem cell state. So since we can do that, it's easily imaginable that it might be also possible to turn differential cells like neurons, cardiomyocytes, and blood cells back to earlier stages, or even change it to each other. If we can achieve this with a relatively good efficiency in vivo, we might be able to eventually regenerate our cells and repair the damaged tissue without transplantation. And this ability base is quite common with the lower animals like salamander, and these animals can repair part of their heart if it's removed, and they can regenerate their tails. So the ultimate goal is basically trying to acquire the similar abilities with humans, but a lot of hurdles need to be overcome. That will require tremendous financial input and work. Last slide. I worked in Jamie Thompson's lab, and there's a technician, Kim. She's working with me for a couple of years now. And other technicians also helped me with some cell culture work. And Igor lab he's specialized in the blood. Maxim provided me some earlier cells for screening. And there's the white cell, and many people in the bioinformatics team helped me with the gene expression analysis. Last, I basically want to say this. This is a very expensive project. I just really glad that Jim actually came through with the support. We barely made it at this time. It's very difficult for us to see whether we can make the same achievement with the future work. Since this technology is very, very simple, and hundreds of the labs already joining this. So we need a lot of financial aid, and plus a lot of talent and PhD with good hands to work on this, to make this into the clinic. I think that concludes my talk.
So as I said to a few people here earlier, we always want to bring good news to the Regents. And this is really great news. It is absolutely spectacular. The campus at Madison feels as proud of this as if we won the best Rose Bowl game. What a great Thanksgiving gift. And I might also say that the technology that John has provided us, the whole reason why the federal government should provide funding for this. We don't have to destroy embryos for this. We are also right now in talks with NIH about providing funding to the National Stem Cell to create disease-specific lines and then distribute these lines to researchers both here at Madison and around the world. If you have any questions of John Ying, it was nice to get a biology lesson, but she would be happy to answer questions. And it's really remarkable. We thought we were several years away from this, and the speed at which they accomplished this is just outstanding.
I'm going to try to ask a question. You mentioned disease-specific, and the slide had ALS and talked about diabetes. Are there other diseases that are easier to approach with this technology, such as what will it do for the retinal diseases or things like that?
I think most likely the first disease that this technology might cure is the disease related to the blood. We already have a long history of blood transplantation, and it basically doesn't involve its interaction with the cells already present in the body. So if we can basically take T cells from patients and turn them back into R T cells, then derive blood cells from them, and if these blood cells can engraft, it can already cure patients in that way.
Can I just comment on that? Yes, from a research standpoint, we can study any disease, and certainly with the retinal diseases, we can generate stem cells from individuals who have the retinal diseases. We have people on campus who can differentiate those stem cells into retinal cells and compare that with other cells to see what genes are being turned on and off. So I think the opportunity to really study disease in a fundamental way is enormous, and one of the things that researchers in this campus are excited about is that this has opened a whole new door. The embryonic stem cell opened the door for studying human development. Now we have a door open for really studying the basics of disease, which is very exciting.
It's my understanding there was another group of scientists working on the skin source also. While they were doing their work and you were doing your work, were you in communication with each other, comparing notes?
Oh, definitely no.
Definitely no.
So I started this particular project in 2005. And this was a very labor-intensive project. I didn't think other groups will take the same approach. So we basically worked, independently, and until the publication with the mouse work, we realized that there's a huge competition there, and this basically, make us work harder to try to get our data published as soon as possible.
I will say that Jamie told for about 3 months ago that they thought they had succeeded with this and that they were in a horse race. And he said that he hoped that they were going to be first, but he couldn't guarantee that. After the publication of papers from both groups, he told me that one of the sweetest things is beating Harvard in California. And if he has to share it with anybody, Yamanaka in Japan is a good person to share it with.
Regent Loftus?
Yeah. Well, first, congratulations to both of you, and Jamie and the people at Lifestyle. Carl, could you just comment on what your plan is on the availability of these patents to other researchers? And then maybe comment on, this takes away ethical considerations, I guess, worldwide, and I assume that many places that have not gone into stem cell research because of that now are able to. And then maybe on federal funds, I agree, there would be no reason not to have federal funds available to researchers all over the United States. But so the patents first.
So first of all, with respect to patents, we have filed applications along the way as they've been working on this project. We don't know what the patent landscape looks like. I'm sure that there's 50 other groups that have been working on it too and filing applications. So it'll be some time before we find out what kind of protection we actually can obtain. As far as researchers are concerned, they don't have to worry about the patents at all. WARF does not intend to require any kind of licensing. This is research that is relatively easily done, as John Ying said. Easy after you've done it, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Hard to get there. But certainly other groups will start working on it pretty aggressively. And that's a good and a bad thing. It's going to move the technology forward very quickly. It's also going to increase the competition for Wisconsin, but we do have the head start here. Again, as far as researchers are concerned, anybody can do this, and they don't need to fear anything from work. We do hope that there are some commercial opportunities that are presented for this technology, and we'll be looking at that. As far as research on this campus, we hope that this is just going to be an explosion of opportunities on the campus that will be both privately funded and federally funded. As I said, YSEL is talking right now with the National Institute of Health with respect to the National Stem Cell Bank. We expect that essentially what they've told us is that they're very enthusiastic about the possibility of putting induced pluripotent stem cells into the National Stem Cell Bank. They want a proposal from us. They're willing to pay for our creating these lines and for getting them into the bank. So for YSEL and the National Stem Cell Bank, this is also a great opportunity. One other comment for the Regents. This doesn't mean that we're leaving behind the embryonic stem cell research. The lines that we have here in Wisconsin, we now have all of the registered human embryonic stem cell lines, with the exception of the lines that are owned by the Swedish researchers, and we are in negotiations with them. I think we have right now 17 of the 21 lines in the bank here at the National Stem Cell Bank. 5 of those, of course, are Wisconsin lines, and 2 of those lines, H1 and H9, are the gold standards. For researchers going forward, human embryonic stem cells are still the real deal, and they're all going to want to still study the human embryonic stem cells for that examination of the window of development. The stem cells also act as a reference for the induced pluripotent cells. What Jianying has done, and the studies that they've done to date, they've got 8 lines in-house, and they have shown that these lines differentiate into all 3 germ layers of the body. As far as they know, they're functionally equivalent to human embryonic stem cells, because human embryonic stem cells are the reference material for them to assure themselves that, in fact, what they have done is reprogram these adult cells back to human embryonic stem cells. So there'll be a lot of research on that, too. Mike?
Carl, does this have any effect on the mortgage gift at all, or anything that's going on with the institute that's going to be coming?
It doesn't have an effect on the gift, except that maybe it will increase the gift. I don't know. But that's something that we're talking with Jamie Thompson about, and we'll be talking with the university about. It does, the possibility of working with this in the Mortgage Institute and in the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery is very exciting. And I think that it's going to be a magnet for attracting really great minds from Wisconsin. So we're happy about that.
Any other questions? Good. Thank you very much. Provost Pat Farrell, I'd want to apologize. I was asked to recognize you in order to introduce our guests, and I completely forgot. The Vice President is usually here when we start, and thus I'm usually more organized.
Jeez Louise.
Thank you, Vice President.
I knew I had a role here, Mr. President. That's clarified.
And you're very good at it, too, I think. Our next order of business is for the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee to be called to order by Chairman Smith. Before I turn it over to Chairman Smith, I just remind everybody that we have a rather extensive audience in participating with us by webcast. They can only hear, however, if we speak into the microphones that are on the tables and also on the sides of the room. So if you're recognized to speak, please don't start speaking until you have a microphone in front of you, and that would be a great courtesy to our extensive webcast audience. So I'll turn it over to Chairman Smith.
Thank you, President Bradley. Could we call the roll of the committee?
Regent Smith.
Here.
Regent Keesler.
Here.
Regent Burmester. Regent Rosenzweig.
Here.
Regent Shields.
Here.
Four, Mr. President.
Thank you. Our first item is the report of the committee to review allocable segregated fee policies. As you all know, the committee to review the allocable segregated fee policies was established by President Bradley and charged with reviewing and clarifying existing policies. I think a copy of the report of the committee in the form of a revised consolidated policy was sent out to you late last week. The Regents, I can say, and particularly this committee, sincerely appreciate the work of this particular committee, the students, the administrators, and the chair, Chancellor Pinnell, for the long hours and I know work that went into the policy that's coming before us today. And I would now call on Executive Senior Vice President Mash.
Thank you, Regent Smith, members of the Board of Regents. I should probably say that President Riley was called away. I assume most of you know that, with the family emergency. His aged father is very ill, and that is the reason I'm sitting in this chair today. The committee appointed by Regent President Bradley was charged with reviewing policies and providing guidance on three specific issues. One, the appropriate criteria for the recognition of student organizations. Two, issues regarding the allocation of on-campus space for recognized student organizations, and the conditions under which it might be appropriate for the university to lease off-campus facilities for use by those organizations. And three, whether allocable segregated fees should be used to support salaries of student organization employees and similar operational expenses. I will begin by asking Chancellor Linda Bunnell, who chaired that group, to summarize all that she and her committee members did to analyze these important issues and gather input from involved stakeholders. After her report, it's my understanding that Regent Smith will call on student members of the committee for remarks. Following those comments by committee members, I will provide our analysis of the matter, President Riley's decision on the matter, and the rationale for that decision. Chancellor Bunnell.
Thank you, Don. Before I review the work of the committee, I want to tell you what a pleasure it was to work with such a dedicated group of individuals, particularly a very, very thoughtful group of students and administrators. I want to recognize the committee members, Dean Lori Berkwam from Madison, Pat Brady, our General Counsel, Anthony DeWeese, who represented University UW colleges, Ray French from Eau Claire, who you'll hear from later, Alex Gallagher from Madison, Regent Shields, of course, wearing two hats, one from Oshkosh and one as a member of the board, Vice Chancellor for Business Affairs at Eau Claire, Andrew Saul, and Vice Chancellor Michael Viney at UW-Platteville. I also want to thank Doug Hendricks, Larry Rubin, and Tom Stafford for their support throughout the entire process. As chair, I did not vote. I only voted in the case of a tie, and that only happened on 2 occasions. Don noted in his introduction, Regent Bradley had asked us to undertake a review of segregated fees. Administrators, students, and others were asking for clarity in the rules and the policies as a result of the appeal of Chancellor Wiley's decision on the Madison campus and the appeal to the board, and as you all are very familiar with. The committee was comprised of 5 students, including Regent Shields, and 5 administrators. It was a very balanced group. We met some 4 times over a period of 3 months to review current policies, to gather information related to our charge, and to draft a policy for recommendation to President Riley. Our first meeting in Madison, September 28th, on a Friday, took us about 4 hours to review the charge and to lay the groundwork for the committee for the remainder of its work. We met again on Tuesday, October the 16th, at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point There we had a very in-depth discussion that lasted about 5.5 hours. Discussion only. We took no votes at that particular time. We explored the policies and we explored the way in which segregated fees are used. There was much debate at this particular meeting regarding the use of segregated fees for off-campus leasing and paying non-student salaries, paying salaries for students who were not, paying salaries to those who were non-students. Our third meeting was Wednesday, November the 7th in Madison. We finalized a draft document over a 6-hour discussion. That did not mean that everyone agreed with that particular draft document, but that we needed to send it out to the campuses for review at that time. The committee voted to solicit input on the policy, and we received in a very short period of time, and I want to thank the chancellors and others. We received wonderful feedback from each of the campuses. It was very, very helpful to our final deliberations at our final meeting on Tuesday, November the 27th here in Madison. The final meeting of the committee, we discussed for about 4 hours each of the questions and concerns that had been raised by the campuses about the draft document. Pat Brady and her staff will be, if they have not already, will be replying to the campuses who submitted questions or comments. My goal as chair was to give each member of the committee an opportunity to both to speak and to be heard, and to work through our issues, to be able to share perspectives with one another. And I can't say that enough about the quality of discussion. Even though we disagreed, we were very clear about the issues that we disagreed upon. The final vote was 6-3 in favor of the recommendation. All members of the committee were present, and the chair did not vote. The main issues of contention were, not surprisingly, the ability of student governments to lease off-campus space for organizations, and the use of allocable segregated fees to hire and pay the salaries of persons not a part of student government. Our committee concluded that although we had met the charge set forth by President Bradley, more discussion may be needed concerning, in particular, whether or not segregated fees are to be treated as state funds. The working premise of the committee was that segregated fees are a part of state funds, are state funds, and thus subject to state policy as if they were state funds. Because we had spent so much time talking and exploring the issues, I encouraged any member of the committee to submit a minority report to President Bradley. And I believe that one of those individuals did, perhaps two, I'm not quite sure. And I believe, am I correct, Vice President Nash, we're going to hear from the student directly?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fine. I won't summarize those for you. As I assured the committee and everyone else with whom I've spoken, I am very confident that President Riley will take all of the information that he received about these issues, not only the committee's recommendations, campus comments, as well as the minority report, all of the information provided him to make a well-informed decision. As I told President Riley in my letter to him, the subject of the committee's work was controversial. It caused tension on the campuses. And overall, however, I feel that the students and the faculty and the staff on our campuses provided very useful feedback in appropriate ways, both on the committee and in their written responses. I especially want to thank the students on the various campuses as well as the students on the committee who took time away from their studies and their work to provide very informed and thoughtful discussion for all of us. Don, does anyone have any questions for me?
Let me suggest this. All of the speakers, I think we've got 4 or 5, are going to be around, and maybe we hold off on questions until we're all done, and then because maybe some of the questioners might want multiple responses from more than one of the speakers. So if that can.
Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. I'd next like to call on Alex Gallagher, who we came to know a little bit through the Madison appeal, and very thoughtful on that appeal and very good arguments, and we appreciate you being here again today and all of your service, Alex, on this committee as well. So as I think we indicated, we're trying to keep the speakers at this point to 5 minutes or so, so
I'll try to keep my
Shoot away,
comments
yeah.
brief as possible.
Thanks, Alex.
So, as Chair Smith has said, my name is Alex Gallagher. I serve as chair of the Student Service Finance Committee at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is the primary student segregated fee review committee. I submitted, I believe, the sole minority report for this one, although I do believe that the other dissenting members of the committee concurred, at least in part, if not in whole, on the things that I provided. And I hope that it was provided for you. If not, I have a copy here and we can get copies for you. It's lengthy and it really breaks down my rationale. Obviously I don't have time to go through all of it right now, but I'd like to just do a couple of the points that I feel are most crucial in this. The first is a discussion of what does shared governance mean. And I think that this has been an issue of contention moving forward. I feel like loggerheads we've come to a loggerhead time and time again because so many feel like it's a competition for power, and it's a competition on who can get their way best, who has the authority in this area. And I feel that that's problematic, and I think that it has led to the tensions that we've seen coming out of this committee. My perception of shared governance is it's an investment of responsibility in those who are most affected by policies. And what we're trying to do is move responsibility from where it naturally lies into, I guess, the ether in order to try to encourage more debate, more communication, and in the end, more cooperation. So in this, the problem then I feel with this particular document is it does represent new restrictions, and specifically new restrictions for Madison's campus. Out of all 13 four-year colleges and 13 two-year colleges, I believe that Madison's campus is the only one that will be directly affected by this. And therefore, this is tantamount to new policy for Madison specifically. Yet I, as the sole student from Madison, was the only person representing that voice on the committee. And I believe that the overwhelming outcry about this policy came from Madison because they were the ones that were feeling the pressure about this. And so this doesn't invest the type of dialogue necessary to really promote constructive policy creation. I really feel like in order to make the best policies here, the best course of action would be to remand this back to Madison and encourage discussion and deliberation on the part of the chancellor and on the part of the students. The students' persistent concern throughout the entire appeal that had led up to this was not the specific policy being addressed, but rather their feeling that they lacked the necessary participation in order to develop a policy that both accomplished, or I guess satiated the concerns of the administration while still providing the latitude for students to operate. I believe that those compromises could be struck, but not on a system level, and not on a level where it felt like we were shooting large cannons at very small objects and had a lot of collateral damage as an effect. So in my policy, I do discuss a lot of the legal concerns from my perception, and my basic conclusion is that these are not so much a legal issue, but more of how do we construct good policy. I discuss the antecedents to this situation and try to analyze what I felt were the catalysts that really led to the place where we are now, specifically what events on Madison's campus led to feelings that we need to create new policy. And so I ask that you review that. And then I guess my objective has been consistently to make segregated fees a sustainable student-run program, to invest as much power as possible within students because I feel like they have the best idea of what the needs of their campus are, yet still make it sustainable and I guess restrictive enough in order to keep it for posterity. So I guess I'm not sure where I was going with that, actually. I apologize. I guess I'll conclude with this, though. At the end of my document, I've provided 3 recommendations that I'd like the committee to consider. The first one is the most straightforward, which is to strike. I feel that it's necessary that we continue with a consolidated document. I feel like the majority of the work conducted by this committee was extremely constructive. But on the substantive issues that reflect new policy that are almost specifically directed towards Madison's campus, I believe that it'd be most helpful to direct each campus individually to compose policy. I believe that the majority of campuses would compose policy that would be in line with the current wording of the document. I believe that Madison would be forced to try to reach a compromise, one that would accommodate both what the students continually desire as well as address the issues put forward by the administration. The lack of the opportunity to do that already has brought us to where we are, and if we wish to repair a lot of the damage that has been done by this adversarial, event, a series of events, I believe that that would be the most prudent way to go about it. The second, and I believe that this has been a consistent, it's been an area of concern for, moving along with this, is that we just simply aren't doing a good enough job communicating concerns, ideas about segregated fees. And this lack of communication, I believe, has also been a very important factor in reaching where we have gotten now. And I ask that the committee review implementing things such as workshops led by both students and administrators for the Board of Regents, for system administrators, instituting forums where campuses can talk collectively about segregated fees, what are concerns, policy issues. Trying to promote communication can only better the system. I've also suggested that it might be helpful to keep this current committee intact to do some more of that research, perhaps perform an audit on what segregated fees are being expended for, and provide recommendations to campuses on what prudent policy would be for campuses to address individually. And then lastly, I just ask that the Board of Regents proceed with caution when they are dealing with issues of segregated fees. I think persistent litigation is one of the biggest threats to segregated fees. It's not a proliferation of funds. It's having to do this and having to go to court to argue about these. And if this continues, then we will see segregated fees lost, and it will be our biggest detriment for the students. And I guess as a student whose mission is really to try to protect that, I ask that you guys move forward with caution. And I guess that concludes my report, and I'll answer questions at the end.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, appreciate that. Another student on the committee was Ray French from Eau Claire. Thanks for all of your work, Ray. Is there comments you want to make?
All right. Thank you, Regent Smith. As you said, my name is Ray French, and I'm the student body president at UW-Eau Claire. I don't have a prepared statement, but I just have a few comments about this issue. And first, I'd like to say that throughout this whole process, I think that all of the students and administrators and everyone involved, our understanding of segregated fees has progressed significantly, and I'm happy with the shared understanding that we're gaining from this process. I was one of two students that voted in support of this policy draft because there are numerous reasons why I voted in support of it. First, I'd like to say that I think from where we started with this committee to where we ended up, we have progressed significantly. We started the committee saying that things like off-campus rent and the salaries for student organization employees were not going to be allowed. But we ended up in an area where it said that, through discussions with the chancellor and a shared governance process, that can happen. And so I was very happy to see a compromise between the administration and students on that issue. And I also think it's important that we didn't specify how that shared governance would happen, but we said that basically it would happen on each campus, and that each campus would be responsible for determining how this would play out. I'm also satisfied with the shared governance that occurred with 5 students and 5 administrators. I believe that we had a great opportunity to really hammer out ideas because in the end we were forced to agree or disagree, and that someone had to break the tie. And so I'm satisfied with the shared governance, and I'm looking forward to seeing this situation and these policies be resolved, and so that we can move on. I'm also not naive enough to think that there aren't unanswered questions still at this point. Two unanswered questions that I think we still need to address and that I think are going to be addressed. One is through the audit of student orgs student organizations and their relationship to the university that I believe the office that does the audits is currently or will be proceeding with. And then the other is the General Counsel's Office research into what is the practical implications of the relationship between state funds and student activities. And so I look forward to seeing how that plays out. But I don't think either of those issues should slow down this process, and that I'm looking forward to there being resolution so that we can move forward and continue to build the segregated fee process to where we're all satisfied. And I'd also like to thank the board for giving me the opportunity to speak and the opportunity of being on the committee.
Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you.
And let me turn it back now to Don Nash.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Bunnell, for your group's report. We appreciate your efforts to lead this committee through some very complex discussions. We also want to thank all members of the committee, including Regent Tom Shields. Mr. Gallagher, Mr. French, thank you for your remarks today. As you've heard, this committee was appointed following an appeal earlier this year by the Associated Students of Madison. But the issue before us today is one that's been simmering and occasionally boiling for some time. And it's complex. Therefore, we believe it's useful to revisit some of the relevant history today. The story begins in 1971 when Chapter 36 of the Wisconsin statutes was rewritten to reflect the merger that created the system. Those statutes granted, for the first time, the opportunity for students to be involved in the distribution of fee funds used for student organization programs and activities. Statute 36.095 makes clear that the chancellor must be consulted and the Board of Regents must approve segregated university fee levels. Statute 36.03 makes clear that the chancellor is responsible for the administration of all funds used at his or her campus. Students do not have an exclusive right to control the disposition of student fees, an exclusive right. Statute provides for student involvement, but does not relieve the chancellors of their responsibilities for fiscal oversight. Following enactment of these statutes, Regent policies were subsequently developed in consultation with students to provide guidance on how segregated fees were to be used and to provide an appeal mechanism for the rare events when students and campus administrators might disagree over fee use. UW system financial administration policies were also developed to provide further guidance on segregated fees. Concerns about the use of allocable segregated fees for overhead expenses, such as rent for non-state properties and salaries for non-university employees at the UW-Madison campus, were first raised in 2004. At that time, Chancellor John Wiley cautioned student organizations about using allocable segregated funds to pay for overhead expenses of this type. In response to UW-Madison's requests for advice in 2004 and 2006, the UW System General Counsel responded with a legal opinion on this matter in November of 2006. According to that opinion, allocable segregated fees were never intended to provide support for overhead expenses, but rather to support campus student activities. To be clear, the process of collecting segregated university fees and distributing them to relevant student-centric campus activities and services was not intended to serve as a kind of United Way campaign for all kinds of causes, no matter how worthwhile they might be. Chancellor Wiley advised student leaders of his intention to apply the legal opinion to campus funding decisions, hoping to provide advance warning to the small number of recognized student organizations that might possibly be affected by this enforcement. Chancellor Wiley repeated the warning in 2006. This year, nearly 3 years after first cautioning student organizations that funding policies would be correctly enforced, Chancellor Wiley declined to approve one section of the Associated Students of Madison recommended segregated fee budget that included off-campus rental payments for 6 of the 700 recognized student organizations. It's worth noting that no other chancellors needed to issue similar warnings to any of the hundreds of recognized student organizations on any of the 24 other UW system campuses, because none of those organizations on any other campus are using allocable segregated fees to fund non-university salaries or off-campus facilities. The Associated Students of Madison in spring 2007 officially appealed Chancellor Wiley's decision to you, the Board of Regents. Mediation was then held on a number of items of disagreement, including the issue of off-campus rent. While that mediation brought agreement on 5 of those items, the parties could not reach a compromise on the matter of off-campus rent. As you know, the board then upheld Chancellor Wiley's decision, citing both the legal opinion I mentioned earlier as well as broader policy reasons. Regents expressed concern about the risk associated with funneling university funds to off-campus organizations and the considerable liability to which the university might be exposed for funding facilities not subject to normal state regulations. Following the appeal, regents and students alike called for more clear-cut guidelines in this area. This, of course, led to the appointment of Chancellor Bunnell's committee. Our goal all along has been to preserve the university's long-standing commitment to shared governance and protect the segregated university fee system. This policy is not designed to fix a near-term problem. Rather, it's designed to provide a long-term framework for sound fiscal decisions for years to come, system-wide. In keeping with their charge from Regent President Bradley, Chancellor Bunnell's committee submitted to President Riley a proposed policy that clarifies the criteria for the recognition of student organizations, establishes a formal process that allows UW system campuses to use segregated fees to lease space for the use of student organizations. I want to repeat that. Establishes a formal process that allows UW system campuses to use segregated fees to lease space for the use of student organizations. 3, establishes a mechanism to allow contracting with outside organizations, including student organizations, for services that the university is unable to provide. 4, makes clear that segregated fees should not be used to pay for the general overhead expenses of student organizations, including such items as rent and salaries, where the university is not the employer or lessor. I want to repeat that one. Makes clear that segregated fees should not be used to pay for the general overhead expenses of student organizations, including such items as rent and salaries, where the university is not the employer or lessor. And finally, 5, clarifies that segregated fees are state funds administered by our campuses. The final policy statement recommended to President Riley was approved on a vote of 6-3. As you've heard, this followed a comment period in which students and administrators on all 26 campuses were invited to offer suggestions and reactions. As you see from the letter that's been provided in your packets today, all 14 UW system chancellors unanimously support the proposed policy. Conversely, student opinions across the UW system are mixed. Student leaders and student government organizations from 6 of the UW system's 4-year campuses have endorsed the proposal put forward by the committee. They include UW-Eau Claire, UW-Oshkosh, Platteville, River Falls, Stout, and Superior. Student government organization leaders from 5 of the 4-year campuses and 1 of the 2-year campuses expressed opposition to any policy that would impose any new oversight over the distribution of these funds. Even among the students who expressed this opposition, however, there is some appreciation for the need for some oversight. While echoing the UW-Milwaukee Student Association's opposition to new restrictions, one student from that campus wrote in a note to President Riley that he understands the need for reasonable policies that ensure some measure of fiscal accountability. The student writes, while it's up to student governments to disperse this money, the UW system should take all necessary steps to make sure this action is within the law and fair to the students they represent. In order for governments to work properly, they need checks. Student governments are, quite simply, no exception. As Chancellor Bunnell described, the special committee was careful to provide opportunities for many voices to be heard. As I noted earlier in describing the history of this issue, the very small number of organizations that might be affected by this renewed, clarified enforcement of state law and UW system policies have had several years to prepare for a change. Those same organizations have been vocal and exceptionally organized in opposing such a change. As you saw in the letter this week from more than 30 legislators, concerns about this proposed policy have reached the Capitol. Here, too, we've been listening to the concerns from there, and President Riley has thanked those elected leaders for taking the time to express their position in a collegial manner. We've been committed to a broad collaborative process in reviewing this matter. We're no less committed to fiscal accountability, sound policy, and good management. Whether we're handling tuition dollars, auxiliary funds, state GPR dollars, federal grants, or private donations, every arm of the UW system must expend these dollars in accordance with established rules, laws, policies, and procedures. Taxpayers, students, parents, legislators, and others expect nothing less. Student fees once received by the university are state funds. Those dollars are not held in trust for students, as some have asserted. They are one classification of university revenues, which must be received, accounted for, and expended by our public university institutions in accordance with a set of reasonable boundaries. This new policy will not controvert the relevant rulings in the Southworth case of 2000, which requires that all organizations be considered for funding on a viewpoint-neutral basis. Nothing in this policy dictates which recognized student organizations should or shouldn't receive seg fees. It only requires that all those organizations play on the same playing field with the same fiscal boundaries. Many students, especially those from UW-Madison, have expressed concern about the ability to use segregated university fees to cover the costs of contractual services that benefit all students on campus. In this proposed policy, under the section that delineates allowable uses of allocable seg fees, the policy specifically provides a mechanism for this use of seg fees subject to 3 criteria, and these are important. 1, the Campus Segregated University Fee Advisory Committee, or SUFAC, you can use an acronym, must demonstrate a substantial need for services that cannot be provided by the UW institution and agree to allocate funds for this purpose. 2, the Chancellor agrees that there is a substantial need for these services and that his or her institution can't provide them, and that the substantial need demonstrated by SUFAC warrants procuring the services. And 3, with that shared understanding of the need, those contractual services must be secured pursuant to established state procurement processes. Proposed policy allows for allocable segregated university fees to be used to lease non-university facilities for use by recognized student for organizations. Contrary to those who would claim that this proposed policy would halt that practice altogether, this proposed policy specifically allows for these expenditures, but again subjects them to the three conditions. SUFAC demonstrating that there exists a substantial need to lease non-university facilities based upon the lack of university space for specific identifiable needs of recognized student organizations, has agreed to allocate student fees for that purpose. And two, the Chancellor agrees that the demonstration of substantial need by the SUFAC warrants the university seeking authorization from the Wisconsin Department of Administration and other state authorities, as required by law, to lease non-university premises for the specific purposes identified. And then finally, the lease is granted by the Wisconsin Department of Administration in accordance with state statutes 36.11, parens 1, parens B, and 16.84, parens 5. Even some of the legislators who signed the letter I mentioned moments ago have privately acknowledged that the process for using segregated fees to enter into contractual agreements should be no different than the processes used by every state agency. To summarize, under the policy recommended to President Riley by Chancellor Bunnell's committee, segregated university fees will continue to support important campus student activities and programs provided by recognized student organizations. The adoption of this financial administration policy will not harm the educational experience of UW students. Rather, will preserve a proud tradition of shared governance while demanding equal levels of accountability for all university funds, regardless of how those funds were obtained. I'd like to cite a December 3rd editorial from the Badger Herald, one of two student newspapers at UW-Madison, which offered the following view on this proposed segregated fee policy. While these changes may not be groundbreaking revisions to the segregated fee system, they at least solidify the notion that these funds are segregated university funds and therefore should be used only for student-run services. Not only does funding non-university resources place UW on shaky legal ground, it begins to distort the true student service element of the segregated fee system. The editorial goes on to say, students' belief that these changes will severely limit their control over segregated fees is without merit. These modifications to policy are a step in the right direction toward reforming the segregated fee system. We agree this is a step in the right direction, and President Riley has asked me to report that he accepts the policy drafted and submitted by Chancellor Bunnell's committee. He accepts the policy drafted and submitted by Chancellor Bunnell's committee. Students and administrators must work together to protect this system of collecting and dispersing segregated university fees. In doing so, we must be wary of increasing pressure from large self-sustaining nonprofit groups seeking to acquire additional funding for general operations not directly focused on the unique educational interests of UW students. The recommended policy provides reasonable protections against this kind of misuse while preserving a valuable funding mechanism for hundreds of student-run, student-centered clubs and organizations on 26 campuses, serving 170,000 students and their campus communities. Out of that diverse universe, no more than a small handful will ever be affected by these changes. To be specific, at this time we're talking about 6 organizations out of 700 registered student organizations at UW-Madison alone. As I noted earlier, those organizations have had 3 years to prepare for this adjustment. These organizations can still request segregated fee funding via the same procedures followed by every other student organization. We sincerely hope they will work collaboratively with their chancellor to find shared solutions to these near-term challenges in order to protect the long-term viability of our seg fee system. We can't encourage that enough. On the other hand, we believe we need a system-wide policy that's clear, because this policy has system-wide implications. Thanks again to Chancellor Bunnell, Regent Shields, and the committee. Thanks to everyone who's engaged in a respectful dialogue about this issue. Regent Smith, that concludes my report on behalf of President Riley.
Thank you, Don. I have one more speaker before we open this up for debate or questions or discussion on our board, and that is because we've heard so much about that this issue arose from the UW-Madison and that the impact, at least arguably, would be more felt here at UW-Madison. I want to have Provost Pat Farrell, if he could, speak a little bit about this.
I'll just make a few comments on behalf of UW-Madison. First of all, I think as Don has carefully pointed out, this is not a brand new issue on the Madison campus. The topic has been under discussion for quite some time. The discussion has become quite pointed in the last few years. I think you're all familiar with that conversation, particularly as you've looked carefully at this issue this past summer and the ASM appeal. On the Madison campus, at least from the administration viewpoint, the frame that we tend to adopt is the one that recognizes these are state funds. There are statutory requirements about shared responsibility for deciding how they should be spent, and the chancellor's responsibility for how funds overall are spent on the Madison campus. So putting those together has in large part gotten the Madison campus to where we are today. I think the policy as written and apparently as accepted will help clarify a number of the issues that have been raised. To be fair, we have written, Chancellor Wiley has written a letter to the committee about proposed guidelines, and we are not, these are not exactly the guidelines we would have chosen either. We still have reservations about them, but given that, we're willing to accept and work with them. My expectation is moving forward, this is really, if you like, a blueprint for how the partnership between, in our case, campus administration, SUFAC, ASM, can work together to achieve the goals that seg fees were set out to do, and do that in a way that satisfies the requirements of state statute and how, who is responsible for what pieces of decision-making with regard to how these funds are spent. I will make one brief comment, as you all know, that there are a few key issues that are, or contentious issues that are embedded in this policy, one of which, of course, is space. You are probably aware that for years that has been a challenge on the Madison campus. As Don mentioned, we have over 700 student organizations. Now, the vast majority of these student organizations do not request space and do not look for it, but there are a number that do, and some that are very large and have significant space needs. If you've driven through the Madison campus, you will notice a rather large building going up on University Avenue, which will be the Student Activities Building, and a chunk of that building is in fact intended for student organizational space. I will not tell you that all desires for student organizational space will be satisfied in that building, but it certainly will give us an opportunity to meet a substantial, if not almost all, of the demand that now we're unable to meet. So I guess in sum I would say that if I look at this policy, I'll perhaps reiterate what Don has said. I see it as providing some clarity in terms of what can be expected and how to move forward with the partnership. I don't think our goals in terms of what student seg fees should be used for and how they add benefit to our students are very different from what ASM or SUFAC or any other group sees as their goal. We may have some disagreements in the past on precisely how these should be implemented. I think these kind of guidelines will help us all start a lot closer together in terms of what our expectations will be. We will still likely have some discussions, perhaps a few disagreements, but I think it's helpful to start out much closer to each other than might have been the case for the past few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Now heard comments on the policy. We've heard President Riley's decision. Let me go around the room for both committee members and non-committee members to ask questions, and let me try to do this in some order. Anybody on this side of the table? Mike.
Two questions. First is, what is our responsibility with this? Or legally, do we vote on this or don't we? Or is this the president's decision?
My understanding is it's the president's decision.
Okay, so it's coming to us for information? Or why is it here, other than we want to know?
Sure.
Information, important contentious issue, full disclosure, a culmination of a process that was begun, the work of the committee as a result of appeal here, and Regent President Bradley having charged the committee for additional clarification.
But it's within Kevin's jurisdiction.
Correct.
Okay. My second question is one of interpretation, and I spoke to Pat briefly, but I'll give you the example because I was concerned with the letter that was written by a lawyer from Washington who was not representing anyone but himself in his letter, as he stated. And he used an example, and I'll try to illustrate it quickly. Assume that there's an organization on campus that's, maybe there's one, a tenants advisory organization where students who are renting facilities are having trouble with their landlords and they want to get some advice. And that organization decides it needs some legal advice. And Pat's office doesn't give legal advice to student organizations. It gives advice to the university system, nor does any Madison campus attorney do that. And the students say they want a contract for outside legal services, say one lawyer to advise them on landlord-tenant law under Wisconsin law. And there has to be a substantial need shown for that. My question is, to follow up from the letter that I read, is the substantial need a question as to whether or not there's a need for space and or legal services? Or is it whether or not that organization should even be in the business of giving legal advice? Is it, how substantive is the substantial need analysis? Is it more at the top level of, well, are there enough desks? Is there enough space? Or is it this organization shouldn't be doing that, shouldn't be giving legal advice? Does the chancellor get involved in the substantive side or more in the, I don't know what the right word is, Jeff, help me out, non-substantive, factual analysis? Yeah. Is it more factual or is it something different?
Well, let me make a very brief response. Then I would be interested in hearing the extent to which the study committee dealt with anything related to that, and then the practices on the campuses in terms of how something like that would be played out. I'd be interested in hearing what a chancellor might have to say. But in reading through all of this material, on the matter of being able to rent off-campus space or to be able to contract for something like that, I read this as simply saying that a case must be made for it and presented to the campus, the chancellor, and with agreement, we then work with the student organizations, the campus does, and the campus becomes in effect, the lessor or the contractor of record. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I've already complicated this a bit, but I mean, it's basically a matter of making a reasonable case as to why there's a need and what the need is, and then somebody making a reasonable judgment that, hey, we can work with you on this, but in terms of who's responsible for the legal arrangement of the lease or the contract, it becomes the campus, not the student organization.
Anybody on the committee have, Pat or Linda or anybody have different, not different, but just to add on to that?
Maybe different.
Well, I think I understand the question, so I'll just take a crack at it here. The demonstration is one of substantial need for the space or for the services, not as to what the organization is up to or whether that organization should exist. If the organization can meet the other criteria for recognition, then we're not going to inquire into whether they're doing things that we like or don't like. The question is, that's a question for just basic recognition. But when you're looking to enter into a lease or enter into a contract for services, then you're looking at those three items. Is there a substantial need? Is SUFAC willing to recommend allocating funds for it? And are they things that we can't provide for ourselves as the university? Because that's really kind of the key, is to keep the services and the activities going on the campus. That's where the students are.
Thank you. That answers. Any other questions from this side of the table as I go around? Or comments?
I'd like to make a comment, but not right now, if that's possible.
Okay, sure. Go on this side. Jeff.
I'm puzzled by the response that you gave to Mike's first question, which is, what are we doing here? I know, the Regent President Bradley appointed this committee, and so it's reporting back, presumably, to the Regents, I would think. I mean, that's the way these things work. Secondly, under shared governance principles with respect to segregated fees, particularly allocable segregated fees, students are to make a decision in consultation with the chancellor, and then finally subject to confirmation by the regents. Now, it would seem to me that we play some role with respect to this policy and the adoption of this policy, and I'm really puzzled as to why it is we're not being asked to participate in this discussion. I mean, we've been told that the policy is adopted, and we don't apparently have anything more to say about it. I'm puzzled and I'm distressed. I'm distressed about it because I think that this policy needs more work. I've been trying to catch up with the committee here since I got a copy of it, and I've read it. I don't think that this is the best policy that we can adopt as a Board of Regents, if it is our role to adopt it. I think that the policy itself has engendered significant disagreement among those who are affected by it, number one, significant disagreement. Number two, I think that there is a lack of clarity and consistency in this policy. I think it is inconsistent in a number of respects. For example, while it professes to give students the role of making decisions with respect to allocable segregated fees in consultation with the chancellor, basically it turns that around with respect to two subjects, the leasing of off-campus space and the entering into contracts. It's the chancellor who makes a decision in consultation with the students. That's inconsistent, it seems to me, with what the policy says about how these things are to work. And finally, I think the tone of the policy is really insulting. Let's not say insulting, inconsistent with the intent of the procedure. For instance, with respect to the costs of leasing non-university facilities, the procedure has SUFAC being required to demonstrate that there exists a substantial need. Now, it seems to me that what SUFAC has to do is determine that there is a substantial need and not make a case for it. That's the role of SUFAC with respect to allocated segregated fees. So I think that with regard to all of those things, there is a need to work on this policy some more. After all, the committee has only spent, 90 days or so on this policy. Vice President Mash said that this is a policy framework that will last for years to come. I think that we can spend more than 90 days on a policy that is going to, policy framework that's going to be in effect and affect a lot of students and a lot of student organizations for years to come. I think it ought to go back to the committee. I think the committee ought to spend a little more time on some of these issues. I think it ought to get a little more input and then come back again.
Well, President Bradley.
If I could just clarify your first point, Jeff.
I was going to call on you to do that because
I appointed that committee to report with recommendations to President Riley, not to report to the Board of Regents. President Riley made the decision that once I received the report, because of the nature of this issue, I would like the whole thing discussed before the Board of Regents, and it would come to this committee. So the committee made its recommendations to Kevin. Kevin, for all the reasons that Don recited, made a decision. Obviously, if you were president of the system, you would arrive at a different conclusion. You would have made a different decision, I would guess. But what we have is our president making a decision based on recommendations from this committee. So that puts us in the position of accepting the decision of our president, whom we've hired to make decisions like that, or overruling the decision of our president. There certainly is room after today for the Regents to talk to Kevin and raise some of these very important issues that you are raising and other speakers have raised, asking for a review of things. And I'm sure Kevin, he's not here to say this, but I'm sure he would be open to the idea that if there are additional segregated fee issues that the system ought to address, bring those to my attention and we can talk about whether the system, the Board of Regents wants to take those on.
Well, let me just ask a question then. What role are we playing here? I mean, we're just here to listen? Is that what we're doing?
We are here to listen to the decision of President Riley. He made the decision to have this open forum because of the nature of the issue. He could have accepted the committee report and said, thank you very much, I've made my decision, and he could have sent out a memo to let everybody know what his decision was. He chose this in the interest of getting the whole thing explained to people, to his rationale explained to people.
Well, let me ask you this. Would it be out of order for me to make a motion to direct President Riley to send the report back to the committee for further deliberation and consideration?
It would be out of order for you to make that motion in this committee hearing because you're not a member of the committee. But you could make that motion tomorrow when the full board meets if you would like it.
Okay, like that's right.
Mike, did you have that? Okay. Hands down. Libby.
And I am a member of the committee,
You are.
so I could make a motion.
You could.
Send it back. Okay. Here are the. I appreciate this opportunity from President Riley for us at least to discuss this because I have all kinds of questions about it. First off, I wondered if any of the other regents had seen the letter from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau that Mark Pocan, and so that has me totally confused. I was just asking a good lawyer beside me. And I guess I would raise the question just as as the students are, does that in any way present any kind of alternative viewpoint as to whether really segregated fees have the same statutory restrictions as state GPR? So I'm confused on that issue. So that would be helpful, you know.
Does anybody have a... Pat, do you want to address that?
I have the letter right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The committee addressed it, I think.
Okay, so
Could we hear a response on that?
Pat, is there anything you can shed some light on that?
Could you explain a little bit the background on the letter, Pat, and
I have to
then...
go back over to Frida, but I think the burden of that letter is that segregated fees are paid under an ongoing appropriation so that we are permitted to spend as much revenue as we take in. And that's what that means. Now, they're not the same as GPR because they're program revenue. And that's the point of the letter. So they're not GPR, that's true. But it doesn't really affect the fact that they're state funds because they are still authorized through an appropriation.
But other agencies have much more authority than...
Well, all agencies have appropriations of one kind or another, and that come with various restrictions. There are some, some certain appropriations. There's some sufficient. They're continuing.
I think you're saying that the letter begs the issue.
I don't think
It states a distinction that's not relevant.
The committee did consider it, though.
Okay, so the committee found it not to be relevant what the Fiscal Bureau said.
I don't think the committee I probably should defer to the chair, but I think the committee really felt that it really didn't really respond to any issue in terms of the substance of the policy.
And that was, has that been explained to United Council and to the student leaders who, as Regent Bartel said, the considerable division that there is on this?
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about it in our last committee meeting.
So it was the subject of the committee meeting?
But it was circulated to the entire committee.
Has there been any time spent by system administration with the leaders of United Council, though, or any of the other groups that specifically on that point?
Well, I think some of those people were at the meeting, so they heard the conversation.
Okay. But no time specifically was, we didn't take the time to sit down and really.
Well, we met last week.
I'm not surprised. Okay. And then the other point that I keep, and maybe other regions too, have been getting lots of inquiry from lots of students, as I have. But then the other, this whole issue of legal versus policy issue, you know, and if the Attorney General, you know, Governor now was the one who defended this, and so that's a big issue with the students as well, as to why is this being defined as a legal issue, isn't it more of a policy issue? And if it's more of a policy issue, I guess I would agree really with Regent Bartel that it raises some questions as to what we're doing right now and the role of the Board of Regents in this. And I guess the only other thing is that I would really ask that no matter how this goes, that we really sit down specifically with those students who, and it could be regents and system staff, but we have to spend some considerable time with the students who are not understanding then the interpretation of system.
Chancellor Markey, you were trying to get my attention there. Do you have something you wanted to add?
Where to begin? I'm kind of old, so it goes way back. I was 30 years ago, plus I was assistant chancellor for student affairs on one of our campuses, the comprehensives, and was a part of the first few years of implementing merger. And one of the most contentious issues was how do you find 36095 in terms of the word primary responsibility. I think I can speak for the comprehensives. And the primary has meant that the students develop the program, develop the services, and present those, and then the chancellor then signs off, and it comes to the board eventually for approval, final approval. But the chancellors are very active in that process. Each year, Regent Bartel, it's very important that we spend considerable time all the way through the chancellor and our student senates and our SUFAC committees going through the history from merger all the way up on what the definitions mean. And the comprehensives are pretty much on the same page across the board. That's why you saw the letters of all of our support of this. And in the Gladfield case example, there was not a dissenting vote from our student senate nor our segregated fees committee about this new policy, because in actuality it's a little bit more permissive, a little bit more visionary for the future. It looks to what services may be out there that we can no longer develop on the campus, that we can work with outside organizations and provide, as long as there's agreement from the students, agreement from the administration, and we follow state rules and state laws. And that's been the critical issue that we deal with every year with the students. We will follow state laws and rules, DOA regulations, etc., related to the hiring of people, the providing of space, the use of those dollars. And that's the critical piece. As a chancellor who has in our job description that we're fiscally responsible for those dollars, we want to protect shared governance, but we also want to be able to sign off and feel that we're comfortable with where that money's going and how it's being spent. So the policy that's being presented today, I think, does those things, has had unbelievable amounts of input. Even though this committee may have only met 4 times, that's just a tip of the iceberg of the input that's gone into this policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Provost Farrell, could I ask you a question? Because one of the things that keeps coming up in my conversations with some of the students is that the impact, if these policies were passed as they were, what is impact on various groups and their activities? And of course, one scenario was that it's going to have a significant impact, and I just wanted to try to get from you as to how you view that, because that certainly is a concern of mine as to if this does pass, what's going to get on the existing groups at UW-Madison, because that's where it seems to be centered.
I guess to my knowledge, this will, as the policy as accepted, will probably have a significant impact on at least 2 student groups.
Okay.
There may be, I would say, more minor impacts on a few more, but 2 student groups in particular, one in particular, has off-campus rental space, has employees which are not university employees, is an active organization, has been vocal in this entire discussion, and has written the policy would preclude, absent meeting the requirements in the policy, that organization operate as a different effect. So there's no question that at least 1, 2 organizations probably will be substantially affected in terms of how they do what they currently wish to do. Okay. And a few others would be, I would say, minor or moderately affected, mostly on space.
Okay. David.
Listening to this, you realize that depending upon your own personal experience in this or how you look at things, you can go either way. If you want to look at a sentence and kind of fly-spec it and compare it to something grander in life, you probably have a criticism. But, there's a long, tortured history to this. And it goes back a long, long way. And just 10 years ago, the irony to me is that the state of Wisconsin was arguing before the United States Supreme Court in the Southworth case to continue what some people perceive to be a tax by few on a great many. Mm-hmm. And some people perceived to be supporting, using state funds to support voices they didn't like. Those were big, big issues. I'm kind of pleased today, and I find it a little ironic that now we're talking about, I think, a small issue. And since that 10 years, we not only got direction from the United States Supreme Court, but there has been thousands and thousands of hours put in by the students and the administration in executing on this plan and in administering these monies. I was very impressed talking to the students about all they do to make sure that we get it right. And the administrators, the poor administrators who have to make some final decisions, but over their head is this tremendous fiduciary responsibility about state funds. This is a very complicated process. And I was surprised to find out that on the Madison campus, we're talking about $6 million. Well, there are businesses that go bankrupt with more money than that. My point is that this is a big thing in terms of a lot of money, but a big responsibility. And to me, looking at it globally, we're just kind of working our way through it. And we finally got a policy that I would like to see implemented so that we see if it works. And if there's some problems with it, believe me, people will be back to us. And I'm sure that we may even have a lawsuit, but I'm not afraid of lawsuits because sometimes that gives us direction, and my kids have to eat. Southworth was a huge lawsuit, and we stood up and we did it, and we defended this system. We defended getting money to these organizations, and here today, we're fighting over it. The good news is we're fighting over the small things, and I would urge us to go forward with this policy. The issue of shared governance, which permeates this whole discussion, I think is not the issue. And I would disagree with Jeff's interpretation of the shared governance issue, because this is shared governance nobody can define. We've had discussions on this with our disciplinary rules. We never did resolve it. Instead, we got together, we sat down, and we got faculty buy-in our disciplinary rules. We never answered the shared governance issue and what the statute said. And likewise, you're not going to answer it in this case. But the simple fact is that the buck stops here. And at the end of the day, we have to agree or not agree to do something and see if it works. And I would urge us to do it because that's what this policy is attempting to do. I have some differences of opinion about the lease issue. I have differences of opinion about paying staff. But believe me, this is getting big time out of hand. And it will get out of hand unless we focus in on the narrow issues. But we've got to have a policy that allows us to make some decisions, and I would urge you to pass it.
Today?
I can't follow that. So I'll just say that I really, and I chose to listen, and I really do think that we should, first of all, I commend Kevin for making the decision to bring this matter and why he supported it to our venue called the Board of Regents meeting. So I do appreciate that. But I also appreciate the fact that it was his decision to make. And I do think that we can, dance on the head of a pin on a lot of things, but let's just see if this works. So I agree with David in that respect. I'm impressed by the fact that the initial committee that was established by President Bradley was, had the student voice in a sincere way present. And I just think that the fact, I'm also impressed by the fact that all of the chancellors, every single one of them, have demonstrated since I've been on this board that they are committed to shared governance. So I want to support them when they say, this policy really reflects the best for what's going on our campus and does protect our ability to continue to work with our student organizations and so on and so forth. I want to let it work. So I personally, and I need to say, I'm not going to be here for the vote tomorrow, but if I were here, I would vote against the motion if there was one offered tomorrow, because I really do think that there are opportunities for us to continue to work this through if there are issues. But for the most part, this is the way compromises work. They're developed, and some people would like them to be a little bit better or different, but in the end, we can't get stalled, and we shouldn't. I think it's bad precedent for us to say to Kevin, listen, by the way, without any attempt to make it work, we're going to tell you that we don't believe you're going to make it work. I just don't feel very comfortable with that, so I would vote against it if there was such a motion offered.
Recognizing that it might be back in front of us tomorrow. Colleen, I know you wanted to say something.
And I know I said I was going to listen.
Maybe you'll have the last word this morning, at least.
I expect all of us have heard a lot from different students, and I know that I have attempted to hear from a lot of different people on this issue. And as I've done that, a few things have become very clear. One is that the system does have problems, significant problems. This is the sort of spiraling out of control idea, which I would argue is not about, as Alex said, not about the quantity, the dollar amount, but about the policies around funds. And the second is that segregated fees mean very different things on each different campus, especially for Madison and somewhat for Milwaukee. And that's not to say that what each campus does isn't valuable, but the scope of segregated fees here at Madison is very different. And I think that it's somewhat unwise to apply one policy to all the campuses. We've heard a lot of support from some of the smaller comprehensives for this policy, and I think that reflects that their policies are close to this. We've heard a lot of dissent from Madison, and I think we need to heed that and pay attention to that. So my proposal is similar to Jeff Bartel's and also similar to Alex Gallagher's, and that is that we need to take a longer, harder look at segregated fees beyond just a few legal concerns which have come up because of current expenditures, and come back to this issue, perhaps reappoint this committee, or perhaps appoint committees, maybe only at Madison or maybe at each campus, and look at all of the issues involved with segregated fees and make a policy that will really set the system on a more sustainable track for the future. Because this board will see this issue again if we approve this policy the way it is. I think we have a chance right now to start a bigger review that will make these more sustainable for the future.
All right. Recognizing that it's and we're going to probably hear again about this tomorrow and recognize the time. Let me go on to item 1.2b, the report on the fall 2007 enrollments. Sharon Wilhelm has been waiting. She's going to discuss fall enrollment. She's going to share data on overall UW system enrollments, including new freshman class, the latest figures on non-residents, transfer students, and students of color. Sharon.
And good morning. My presentation this morning provides an update on this fall's UW system enrollments, and there is much good news to share with you. This presentation provides primarily system-wide enrollment data. Additional campus-specific information and details regarding campus initiatives will be provided at an upcoming board meeting as part of the Achieving Excellence Accountability Reports. This fall's UW system total enrollment that includes both undergraduate and graduate level students stands at a record high of over 173,000 students, up 3,600 students from last year, and surpasses the enrollment levels of the 1980s. The largest increases in total headcount enrollments were seen at UW-Milwaukee with an additional 1,000 students, and UW-Madison with an increase of 500 students. UW-Green Bay, Platteville, and the colleges each increased roughly 400 students. Focusing on just undergraduate enrollments, this fall the UW system has almost 149,000 undergraduates. This is an increase of 3,100 undergraduates from last year. Enrollment changes from last year are indicated on the slide in the parentheses. The growth of undergraduate enrollments was seen primarily in the additional 1,300 new freshmen and an additional 1,600 continuing students. The growth in the number of continuing students is not new, as they have been increasing each year and have grown by 14,000 students in the last 10 years, as seen in the rightmost set of 3 bars. Over the last year, most of this growth has been at the junior and senior levels. A greater number of undergraduates continuing on to complete their bachelor's degree. New freshman enrollments are at an all-time high. This fall, UW institutions have enrolled over 30,000 new freshmen. This is an increase of 1,300 from last year. The smallest new freshman fall class was in 1994, when the UW system had 8,000 fewer new freshmen. In 1974, shortly after merger, there were about 1/4 fewer new freshmen than today. The largest increases in the number of new freshmen this fall are at UW-Milwaukee with 500 additional new freshmen, UW-Madison with an additional 350, and UW-Whitewater with almost 260 more new freshmen. The new freshman access rate is the proportion of Wisconsin high school graduates who enrolled the following fall in the UW system. Last fall, the UW system provided access to 1/3 of Wisconsin high school grads, 32.5% to be exact. In comparison, we enrolled 1/4 of the high school grads in 1976. The access rate has been relatively steady over the past 20 years, ranging between 31 and 33%. With the increases seen in new freshmen and the estimates of the number of last spring's high school graduates, we project this fall's access rate to slightly climb, 1 percentage point to 35.5. Another good news item is the gender gap between male and female new freshman enrollments is gradually closing. Although females still comprise a greater proportion of enrollments than males, the gap is the smallest it has been in over a decade. The greatest gap was over 12 percentage points in the year 2000. In the mid-1970s, males and females comprised equal shares of the new freshman class. And prior to that, there were more males than females. The number of resident new freshmen enrolled in the UW system is at an all-time high. With an increase of 760 students from last year, the number now stands at a total of 24,735. This reflects a steady increase from 21,000 a decade ago. Wisconsin residents comprise the vast majority, over 80% of the new freshmen. The number of non-resident new freshmen has increased by over 500 students from last year and comprises 10% of new freshman enrollments. The number of new freshmen attending a UW under the Minnesota Reciprocity Agreement, the red trend line, has been holding relatively steady the last couple of years. Reciprocity students comprise 9% of the new freshman enrollments. More than 3/4 of this fall's new freshmen were in the top half of their high school graduating class. 45%, almost half, were in the top quartile. This fall's new freshmen had an average ACT composite score of 23.2. This average score has only deviated by 0.3 of a point over the last decade and is 2 full test points higher than the national average. Transfer students. The number of transfer students is up, over 200 from last year. The transfers within the UW system, or intra-system transfers as they are referred to on the slide, comprise the largest proportion, 43% of all transfers. 30% of the transfers previously attended an out-of-state college, and 20% transferred from a Wisconsin technical college. 10 years ago, WTCS transfers comprised only 15% of all transfers.
Could you just go back to that slide a little quick there?
That one, Tom?
So what was your point of the technical colleges? I missed it. How many years ago they were?
10 years ago, that instead of 20%, it only comprised 15% of our transfer students. So it's grown. As illustrated on this slide, the number of transfers from the Wisconsin Technical College has been increasing each year and represents record highs. Over 40% of these transfers are from 2 of the technical colleges, the Madison and the Milwaukee area technical colleges. The number of students of color have been steadily increasing and is up over 900 from last year and up over 5,000 from 10 years ago. Compared to last year, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians are each up 300 students, with only a slight increase of 50 for Native American students. Students of color now comprise 10% of the total student body. The number of international students has also increased and now stands at just over 5,500. This is an increase of almost 300 students from last year and has rebounded after the declines of the last several years. Enrollments of veterans in the UW system are rapidly increasing, with almost 4,000 veterans enrolled this fall. This is a growth of almost 1,500 in just 2 years. Since its implementation in fall 2005, an increasing number of veterans and eligible spouses and children are utilizing the Wisconsin GI Bill to cover their tuition and academic fees. Latest figures for this fall indicate over 2,400 veterans and nearly 750 spouses and children are benefiting from the Wisconsin GI Bill. The number of non-resident undergraduates, the blue trend line on the graph, has increased by 1,300 since last year and now comprises 8% of undergraduate enrollments. Non-resident enrollments have grown since the board implemented the competitive non-resident tuition policy 2 years ago. Though not seen on this graph, during the same time period, resident undergraduate enrollments grew by more than 1,700 headcount. it appears the non-resident tuition policy is achieving its desired goals of attracting more non-residents, which in turn supports additional resident undergraduates. The number of undergraduate reciprocity students, while increasing only slightly from last year, has increased by more than 2,000 over the last 10 years as the agreement continues to provide attractive options for both Minnesota and Wisconsin residents. In summary, there are several good news items. UW system total enrollments are at an all-time high, along with the number of new freshmen and WTCS transfers. There are a greater number of undergraduates continuing on to complete their bachelor's degree, and progress is being made at closing the enrollment gender gap and increasing the enrollments of students of color. That concludes my remarks, and we would be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Peggy.
And just a quick question, Chair. Of the students that are transferring from the technical colleges, do we know the amount of students of color that are coming from that pool of people?
I haven't looked at that, but we can. We have the ability.
It would be interesting to know if that's a feeder, a positive feeder. Nice.
Tom.
Yeah, Sharon, on the freshman enrollment in Madison, those students enrolled in the two M8 Madison Area Technical College programs, are they counted as freshmen at UW-Madison?
I believe they're considered transferred when they do transfer here. Maybe Chancellor or Provost Farrell might know.
5,900 we need is number you see is on-campus students. The connection students are not counted.
Okay, so those connection students that are enrolled as literally as freshmen, we add to that number? Okay. And how many are they?
The order of 100.
100, okay.
Thank you.
And then on the international students, do you include graduate and undergraduate students in that number?
Yes, we did.
What's the breakdown between graduate and undergraduate?
Another really good question.
And how many international students are there actually in the UW system outside the Madison campus?
What we'll do is we've just recently started analyzing all this fall data, and we typically really delve way into it after the first of the year, when we have our final file from the campus. And we haven't really looked at that as a lot of these issues as deeply as you're suggesting that we should, but we will be.
And the disparity between women and men continue in these figures at the same rate?
Overall?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're seeing, let's see, let me get that.
Some good news.
What we're seeing is the enrollment gap closing gradually. So we're having more male students attending than we had in the past. Is that the question you had?
Well, I mean, at one campus, I think it was Green Bay, we had close to 65%.
These are system-wide numbers, and the institution-specific numbers will be more available when we do the Achieving Excellence, and that is in that Achieving Excellence report.
Tom, that graph on page 5 would tell you that it's narrowing, but it's still for freshmen by gender, but it's not. Danae, you had a comment?
Question on the transfers. Thanks, Sharon. Mentioned the increase in transfers from WTCS colleges. The out-of-state, is that trend up or down or new?
The out-of-state transfers
yes.
are, we have a little bit of an increase, but it's not as substantial. As a proportion of all transfers, it's going down slightly.
Okay. And on that same slide, just to make sure I understand the interpretation, the UW colleges, 18%, is that transfers within it anywhere or from a UW college's campus to a 4-year?
the latter.
Okay. And then the question on the 4-year. That just among?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike and then Chuck.
I have two questions. When we establish a budget, do we establish that budget, is one of the considerations in establishing a budget, number of enrollments, number of students enrolled? And then if we do, which I don't know how we couldn't, how do the numbers you're presenting to us compare to the numbers that we used in establishing the budget?
The growth and how it compares to what was estimated in the DIN process, is that the question? And Frida, maybe you'd like to address that.
When we're establishing the budgets for the institutions and for the system, we look at the enrollments at the level that was established previously. So we would look at this and say, we have a certain number of students that we already have enrolled. They will generate tuition, and it's all based on that. In future years, as they enroll more students, that gets factored into the dollars that will be available at the institutions, therefore bringing up the tuition revenue that you see in your budget. So it's not there until after the students are actually there. The other time that you will see something happening related to enrollments is when we have in our initiatives, like the growth agenda, which really starts next year, that there is some tuition revenue associated with additional enrollments. So that's when you'll see that. But otherwise, because we haven't been receiving state resources for new enrollments, they show up when the actual tuition dollars have shown up after the student is enrolled. Does that help? Not knowing if we were to look at what was shown here, which is that when you look at this, you'll see that our enrollments of new students is up. We do not factor in ahead of time the tuition revenue associated with those students. We don't
how about the costs of the students?
Yeah, the cost.
How about the costs of the students?
The cost of the students isn't factored in either, because we don't have a way of knowing that they're going to be there. So, you know, as the campuses are enrolling these students and they find out that they need to have additional resources to educate those students, then they'll expend the funds and they'll use the resources that they get from the tuition dollars that the students bring into the campus. But in future years, as they know the students are there, we will budget for, plan for, and have those dollars in what you see when you approve your budget.
So one follow-up. So we have a growth agenda. We create budgets, but we don't anticipate enrollment.
The growth agenda that you're talking about is the state-funded growth agenda, which starts in 2008-09. In 2008-09, we will anticipate having some additional growth, and that will be factored into the budget that you will see. But in the prior years that we've had, there have not been state resources dedicated to support those student enrollments, and so they, as they come in, they bring in the dollars. They're available to the campus to use to help educate those students, but we don't pre-plan for that.
Is that just how you roll it together at the system level, or I mean, do our universities and colleges actually, when they go through their planning process, not budget for enrollments? They do not anticipate set goals for enrollment?
If the campuses are looking at additional enrollments, they work with us, and they will say, we anticipate having 500 additional students. We have said to the institutions that we don't want you to put that in your budget until you actually have that, because we don't want you to be anticipating that you're going to actually use these dollars if the students don't show up. Once they're there, once you've given us a record of that, then we will work with you to put that in on an ongoing basis, so on and so forth. What some campuses do is they build in the expectation that they might have some of those additional resources, and then they reflect the fact that they're not really authorized at that point to do that from our standpoint. We don't want you approving a budget that's speculative, is basically what our office does. We want the budget that you see to be based upon what has been really sort of demonstrated as actual ability to generate and sustain those revenues.
Still with a degree of speculation.
With some degree. There's
Like a
always some degree of speculation when you're talking about budget.
It's like a bank that gets more deposits than it thought of.
Yeah.
Deposits cost money.
We don't want deposits, we just had that established.
Otherwise, what you would see in the process of the budget is so much fluctuation. We anticipate we're going to have 500 students. We build in. We get 300 the next time you have to take it down. We prefer to kind of keep it steady as to what you see, that there were actually 500 students. There's more revenue. That revenue is going to be there on a continuing basis so that you don't get the fluctuations. The campuses know what resources they have. We're very careful to work with the campuses in a planful manner.
I'm going to call on Chuck, and then we have been told some of our, specifically Speaker Hipsch is on a time frame for our meeting, and I don't want to have him miss our meeting. Chuck.
Very quickly then, Sharon, I'm just interested in causation because all these numbers look great. I mean, they're all about the growth agenda. It's all about more. The two areas that I guess I would be interested in, if you haven't already done in sort of future analysis, is one, this question of what is the effect of this board easing the transfer of credit policy between the technical colleges and the university system some years ago. To what extent was that a contributing factor to a continuing growth? And I think it would be useful to have some real hard data, because I think the legislature, the governor, and others might be interested in that. And second, and particularly interested, given that it was the subject of, a good deal of controversy over the time, the effect of lowering non-resident undergraduate tuition on increasing enrollment at the comprehensives and at UW-Milwaukee, and how we attribute that as a contributing variable in terms of leading to those increased numbers. I think both have, because they deal with policies that this board enacted, and did it work, didn't it work? If so, how much? I think would be useful to know.
All right. Chancellor Wilson, we've really got to hustle here. We're behind.
I just have a very, very quick point here. This is in reference to the way Patrick responded to the Madison connection students in the technical colleges. Also not reflective in this 5,900 figure is about 125 UW-Madison connection students on the colleges as well. And so if you were to put these two numbers there, I assume Patrick, that would be about 6,200 or so Madison.
Thank you. You don't want to keep a speaker waiting, do you, Ambassador Loftus?
Former speaker.
That went rude.
Go ahead, Bill.
Whatever. The new freshmen by high school rank, those are interesting in themselves, but have you yet collected the new freshmen by family income and the quartiles that we use?
The new freshmen by income for all new freshmen is off of the ACT data that we received as a year lag. And so for this incoming fall, we don't receive that information until next summer. But also, though, we will be producing the distribution for the fall '06 enrollments shortly, and that will be in the materials that you subsequently will get. I also want to do a little plug for our informational memorandums, which really delve into a lot of these subjects to a much greater depth than what was displayed today, and those come in after the first of the year also.
Thank you, Sharon. We'll stand in recess. Our committee is going to go upstairs and start in 20 minutes so we can keep on task today. Take lunch upstairs, right?
Talk about the last